Hello and welcome to Scream Scene, the horror movie podcast where we watch every horror movie ever made in chronological order and then we rank them from best to worst. My name's Sarah.
And I'm Ben.
Thank you for listening to us today. We have a pretty big episode today.
Yes.
But before we dive in, how are you doing, Ben?
I could be doing better.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I've been kind of down for a few weeks now. It took me a while to realize how bad it was. But then at one point I was really feeling down one day and I looked back and I went, oh, I've been feeling like this for a while. So I'm hoping that it gets better and that I feel better by the time my birthday rolls around a little later in the month. But I am excited for tonight's episode, which, as you said, is going to be a big one.
Yeah, I would just remind you and any folks who are listening who are also having a hard time that time is ever moving forward, which means how you feel right now is not forever. The time will come that you feel better. It gets better. I myself am feeling pretty good. I am feeling the effects of being 36, and by that I mean sore after helping people move.
Yeah, it's been like a week, right?
Yeah, so
yeah.
I tried to do some stretches to help out my hip and knee and ended up overstretching my neck, and so now my neck really hurts. We're having a time over here.
Yeah.
Yeah. But without further ado, what are we watching today?
Today, Sarah, we are watching Whatever Happened to Baby Jane from 1962, directed by Robert Aldrich. Sarah, have you ever seen this movie?
I have not. It's big enough that, you capture some through pop culture osmosis. So I know images from this movie. I do know that there's like a particular scene with like hangers, like coat hangers. And that it's two icons, Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. That's about all I know of it.
So, funny enough, for any listeners who don't know, my main job is I'm the programming coordinator for the Calgary Cinematheque, which is a little non-profit arts organization here in Calgary. And we show classic films and foreign films and artsy films and that kind of stuff. And we programmed a whole month of Bette Davis and Joan Crawford movies back in March. We called the series 40s Divas, the inflated rivalry between Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, where we showed sort of back and forth, like two movies from each actress, kind of alternating some of their biggest hits with some of their like more lesser known titles. And then it ended with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane at the start of April as kind of like the finale to the series. And I remember at the time you turned down the offer to like come and see the movie in a theater because you knew we would be covering it for Scream Scene pretty soon, and you wanted your first time seeing it to be for the show.
Yeah, there've been a couple occasions where a movie's coming up for the show, so I like avoid watching that movie if like something comes up on TV or something. Because I like the idea of first reactions being on the podcast.
Sure. So I think, this is a movie, as you said, that I think a lot of people get familiar with through pop culture osmosis. It's had a big legacy. It is really well known for the rivalry between the two stars and the feud. And I'm going to talk all about that, but this movie started as a book.
Yeah, that book is the novel Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, written by Henry Farrell, published in 1960. It's kind of labeled as like psychological horror, but on the cover itself it says that it is a novel of suspense. Now, the author was born Charles Farrell Myers in California in 1920. He served in the Army Air Forces in World War II through his 20s, And as the war wound down and he waited for his discharge, he decided to give writing a go. He started with pulp, as many authors of this time did, and wrote the Toffee short story series in these pulp magazines. Have you heard of Toffee?
No, not at all.
So it is about a rambunctious red-headed woman who exists only in the mind of the protagonist, Mark Pillsworth.
Okay.
This dream girl occasionally becomes reality, resulting in hijinks.
You don't just exist in my mind, right?
This whole time, you've only been talking to yourself and a microphone.
Oh, no.
Really? You'd describe me as rambunctious?
Yeah.
Oh. Well.
When you're not like super, super tired from work.
So you might be thinking, how does someone go from like gag writing, like this hijinks, to a horror novel? Well, that kind of starts with his first novel from 1959. It's called The Hostage. And it follows a young boy, Davy, as he is accidentally kidnapped as he explores the inside of a moving truck. Now, this novel is adapted into a film in 1966, but I feel like it's only because of the success of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane and another movie.
Sure. Yeah, at that point, it's one of those things where it's like, well, let's just see what else this author has.
Exactly. Now, Farrell was interested in showbiz. After all, he's in California, and his wife, Molly Dodd, was a stage actress, also trying to break into Hollywood. She has some work here and there. We'll hear a little bit more about her when we reach the 70s, honestly. But of note is that in 1958, she had a very small part in Hitchcock's Vertigo.
Oh, okay.
Not wanting to mix genres between Toffee and things like The Hostage or other work, he began to use the alias Henry Farrell. He would be writing some stuff for TV, an episode of a 1961 show called Bus Stop.
Never heard of it.
Okay. And then an episode for Alfred Hitchcock Presents in 1962.
Okay.
And this pseudonym was also used for his next book, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, published in 1960. And I thought it was interesting to share a quote from him. It's from his obituary in the LA Times.
Oh, okay.
This is him explaining why he turned to suspense writing from the pulpy gag writing.
Sure.
And he says, quote, "It was the gag writing, I think, that most influenced me to try my hand at writing a novel of suspense. Sweating out that all-important laugh that far too frequently materializes as just another deadly silence can easily turn a writer's mind to thoughts of violence. Getting right down to it, I suppose I turned to suspense just to put an end to the suspense."
That's funny.
Have you read the novel?
No, I have not read the novel.
Okay. So there's a rumor about the novel being partly inspired by the Janes sisters in Hollywood.
I've heard that rumor.
The Janes sisters are three sisters, Carrie, Mabel, and Grace, who ran the Mrs. Janes School on Hollywood Boulevard from 1911 to 1926. While anyone could enroll in the school, they were largely educating children of major film stars, including Charlie Chaplin, Douglas Fairbanks, and even Cecil B. DeMille's children. This home itself was built in 1903. The school started in 1911, and it was fairly successful until the sisters' parents passed, and a series of hard times led to the school closing in 1926. Now, their brother David turned the very large front yard into a gas station and mechanics shop called Jane's Auto Shop. So that's what the location is at the time of this movie and of this book. This auto shop fell on hard times, largely with like Hollywood Boulevard itself, all the businesses on there kind of closing through the 60s and 70s. The last of the Janes sisters died in 1983, and the house still stands. It's declared a heritage landmark, and it's currently a 1920s themed speakeasy.
So I don't buy
Yeah.
that this is based on that.
Yeah. After reading the book's plot, I don't see any actual connection to the Janes sisters, but I think if anything, it's just drawing on like, oh, child actors. They taught children actors, therefore it must have inspired him to write about this. And it's like, no.
Yeah, well, and like, you know, there's also an aspect that's like, oh, it's these sisters who sort of like were successful, but then they kind of became like recluses in this old house. And the thing is, it's the wrong number of sisters. They have the last name Jane. Jane in the book is a given name. They weren't actresses. It's the wrong time period. And honestly, I think this is sort of a come see Dracula's castle situation where it's like, oh, this helps generate tourism for the building by saying like, oh, this is what the movie was based on. But like, I've also heard that it's based on Mary Miles Minter, who was a silent film actress. And I've heard all kinds of things. Ultimately, the story comes from like very, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. I don't know how you say tropes when you're referring to real life, but like kind of the standard arc of like stars who were once big and fell on hard times and what happens to them. I mean, this has already been kind of done in movies already with Sunset Boulevard in the 50s, but that was like a film noir, a very different kind of thing.
Yeah. Honestly, I would argue that the book is probably drawing more on Sunset Boulevard in terms of mood and framing and all of that.
Yeah. But there's, I think, a cottage industry when it comes to like tourism about trying to say like, oh, this place is the place that inspired this thing you've heard of.
In any case, here's the plot of the novel. We have two sisters, Jane and Blanche Hudson. Never name your kid Blanche. Nothing good happens to Blanches. So Jane is the golden child growing up thanks to her fame as a child vaudeville performer, and she uses the stage name Baby Jane. And Blanche is kind of neglected as a result from their father. Now, when their parents pass, the sisters move to LA to live with their aunt, and this is when they're about teens, and Blanche is scouted by a Hollywood executive because of her blonde hair and being very pretty. And so she ends up having a very successful adult film career.
Yeah, you don't want to say that.
To clarify that it's not a child star.
Film career as an adult.
Film career as an adult. I apologize. So she has a very successful career, while Jane was never really able to make the transition into film after her vaudeville days. Blanche even has a contract stipulation that Jane has to be in her movies, but they're kind of bit parts. Fast forward to the present, and the sisters are aging old women. Jane still dresses as though she's 10 and the character Baby Jane, and Blanche is a paraplegic after a mysterious car accident. Jane is resentful of Blanche because of the career, hates taking care of her, and is ultimately an alcoholic. And Blanche begins to realize that Jane is becoming a little bit more unstable, so Blanche plans to sell her house where they live, and Jane overhears this and fears that she will be institutionalized when this happens. So she begins to isolate Blanche from her lawyer and the housemaid, removing the phone, for example. And Blanche ends up being kind of a neglected, not being properly taken care of. At one point, Jane tries to feed Blanche a dead bird from the yard, so fearing what is in the food, Blanche stops eating. And Jane has this great idea while drunk that she could use Blanche's money to revitalize her Baby Jane act. I guess there's like a real life case of this, of an actress named Fanny Brooks revitalizing her career as Baby Snooks.
Huh.
So, Jane hires a man named Edwin to be her accompanist. Now, the maid, Velma, is getting a little suspicious and a little worried, so she tries to check on Blanche and sees that she's like restrained and is not doing well, and Jane murders her. Jane begins to be racked by guilt, and so she tries to stop drinking, she tries to nurse Blanche back to health, up until Edwin discovers Blanche and makes a run for it. He's really freaked out. So Jane gets into her car and tries to run him down. Believing that she's killed again, Jane takes Blanche to the beach where they had happier memories, and she gets drunk. Blanche is dying, and so she reveals that, actually, it wasn't Jane who paralyzed her. In these years past, Jane had embarrassed Blanche at a party, so Blanche tried to run down her sister in the car. She ends up crashing the car and tries to pull herself to safety. Meanwhile, Jane had blacked out, was sleeping it off like at this flop house, so she doesn't remember anything, and the cops ultimately assumed Jane had been driving the crashed car. And the reason why Blanche shares this now that she's dying is she believes it's the guilt over the crash that has driven Jane insane. Ultimately, Jane forgives Blanche. And so she goes to go to a phone to try to call the police and get some help because Blanche is dying. And she gets recognized by a couple of police officers who say, "Oh, Miss Hudson, it's so great to see you out and about." This prompts some hallucinations that she is on the stage. She's getting ready to perform. And the novel ultimately ends unclear if the cops get to Blanche on the beach or if she dies there. So that's the novel. Very long, kind of convoluted, but it is a suspense novel,
yes,
as they said. Now, that novel was adapted to film in 1962, as well as later as a TV movie in 1991 with Lynn and Vanessa Redgrave as the sisters. Now, as I'm sure that you will explain in a little bit, the 1962 film was a very big success and bolstered Henry Farrell's star. So he would end up writing a short story turned screenplay follow-up to become 1964's Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. Or Charlotte, depending on where you are. I learned this recently. Folks in like Northeast US say Charlotte instead of Charlotte.
Huh.
Now, Farrell's continued writing novels through the 60s, retired in the 70s, and passed away in 2006.
Okay.
I can share a bit more about his life later when we eventually reach Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte.
Sure, of course. The whole plot of whatever happened to Baby Jane being based around these aged movie stars, I think it's really natural that it got adapted to film. It kind of is like, oh, what a no-brainer in a way. In fact, people started bidding for the rights on the novel 3 weeks after its publication was announced.
Wow.
So before it was even out, right? People kind of like it bounced around for a little bit between different producers because no one could find the right actresses to kind of take the roles. It was very unusual in that, like, at this time in the early 60s, and frankly, today still, you don't get a lot of movies that are anchored by actresses over the age of 40.
Yeah.
Right? But eventually, the book found its way to the desk of director Robert Aldrich, who believed that the book provided him with a perfect opportunity to make good on sort of an old promise. Aldrich is a really interesting guy. As I'm about to explain, he's like one of the most worked his way up directors I've ever heard of.
Okay.
Like really paid his dues, despite the fact that he came from a really privileged background. So he was born in 1918 in Cranston, Rhode Island, to a very wealthy and well-connected family, like classic New England blue bloods, basically. His father was a newspaper publisher. His grandfather was a millionaire senator. He had uncles who were bankers and politicians. You know, the family traced their descent from the founder of Rhode Island kind of thing. He even had an aunt who was married into the Rockefeller family.
Okay.
And Robert was actually the Aldrich family's only male heir. So there was a ton of pressure on him to succeed. He was expected to go to an Ivy League school and go into law and like business and all of these things. So accordingly, he failed to get into Yale, then dropped out of university, did not go to an Ivy League school, did not get a degree. And during the Great Depression, he actually denounced his family's wealth and power. He kind of became like a leftist and like called out, the kind of crony politics and nepotism and their hoarding of wealth during a time when Americans were suffering. And so subsequently, he was disinherited.
Yeah.
So he was totally cut off from all the wealth and connections that his family should have brought him. At age 23, he began working at RKO as a production clerk.
What would that look like? Just like office work?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was disqualified from military service in World War II owing to an old football injury from college, and the lack of manpower at RKO during the war led to him getting jobs as a third assistant director.
Okay.
Just kind of like, oh, you're around the studio,
Yeah.
and everybody else is at war, so here you go, kid. Working as a third AD brought later jobs as a second AD, and by 1944 he had worked his way up to become a first AD.
Okay.
So this guy's going from PA to third to second to first, like working up the actual like career ladder of being a director, which in my experience is actually super rare. Most people get to first AD and then stop rising at that point, because being a first AD, being a good first AD is super important. And it is kind of a totally different skill set than being a director.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of directors, at least nowadays, not in the studio system, but nowadays, tend to jump straight to being a director. They don't rise up from a lower position. Instead, what they rise up from is like low budget indie films to bigger and bigger and bigger movies if they're successful.
Yeah, I think that's a byproduct of the auteur theory approach to filmmaking.
Yeah. So anyways, Aldrich became a first AD, and that enabled him to work really closely with a lot of notable directors, including people like Joseph Losey, Abraham Polonsky, and Charlie Chaplin.
Oh, nice.
All kind of leftist directors.
Yeah.
He ended up like making a lot of professional connections with, all the people on the crews that would serve him really well going forward in his career. He kind of missed HUAC. Like a lot of his heroes who he was an AD for got blacklisted. And because he was just an AD at the time, nobody gave a shit about him. His actual like directing career came after.
Okay.
To break into directing features, he still had to pay his dues. He went to go direct television from 1952 to 1954. It was in that year that he finally directed his first theatrical feature film for MGM. And soon he had his first hit, a color western called Apache, starring Burt Lancaster. More hits followed, and Aldrich began to produce as well, with 1955's film noir classic Kiss Me Deadly. In 1956, he directed his sixth feature film, Autumn Leaves, which was a psychological thriller starring Joan Crawford and Cliff Robertson. Sort of an older woman affair with a younger man kind of movie. The film was a box office success, and Crawford really enjoyed working with Aldrich, so she implored him to find another project for the two of them to work together on. But nothing really clicked until Aldrich discovered Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. In the meantime, between that project and this one, Aldrich's career kind of faltered with a series of flops, abandoned projects, and expensive messes, such as 1962's Sodom and Gomorrah, a old-fashioned, like, expensive biblical epic that got shot and funded in Italy.
Yeah. Swords and Sandals was that genre,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So in a very similar way, Crawford's career was practically in a coma. She'd only done 2 films in the previous 6 years.
Oh, wow.
So let's talk about Joan Crawford.
We last saw her way back when.
No kidding. We last saw her way back in The Unknown in 1927. So if you don't remember anything from that episode, I won't hold it against you. Crawford was born Lucille Fay LeSueur in San Antonio, Texas, sometime between 1904 and 1908. If you ask Crawford after a certain point in her life, it's 1908. And if you ask her daughter after a certain point in her daughter's life, it's 1904. And every year in between has also come up and been suggested. The general belief, I think, is that she was born in 04, but just lied about her age. But we really don't know because her family wasn't like super wealthy, didn't keep those kinds of records. And her father left the family when she was just a baby. And then her mother remarried to Henry Casson, and the family moved to Lawton, Oklahoma, where Casson ran the opera house there. Lucille grew up with the nickname Billy. That was the name into adulthood that like she preferred to be called, that she kind of regarded as her name. And she grew up wanting to be a dancer. But after Casson was accused of embezzlement, the family moved to Kansas City, Missouri, and Crawford had to become a work student at the schools she went to. If you don't know what that means, basically to afford tuition, and these were at like essentially the equivalent of high schools, finishing schools, not universities. In order to afford the tuition, she would work at the school, like making food, scrubbing dishes, being a janitor, that kind of stuff, in exchange for like being able to take classes. But ultimately her studies really suffered because she was working all the time. And ultimately, due to her family's instability, she never finished secondary education.
Okay.
She did begin dancing in chorus lines in various shows, making her way to Detroit and then Broadway by 1924. She screen tested for MGM, and they awarded her a contract. So she moved out to Hollywood, and her name was changed because Louis B. Mayer thought that her name would remind people of a sewer.
I guess.
Lucille Fay LeSueur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they change people's names at the drop of a hat.
Absolutely.
So
MGM, their publicity department held a contest to allow movie fans who read like certain movie magazines to pick a new name. It was like the Name This Star contest or something. And Joan Crawford was the winning pick. She would later say that she would have preferred it if it was Joanne, not Joan, and that she disliked Crawford because it made her think of crawfish. But once she became like a big star, she said that she came to appreciate the security that the name brought her.
Yeah.
Crawford became really frustrated with the small roles and, bit parts and things she was getting at that time. So she decided to make herself a star with her own publicity, making sure that she was seen dancing at popular clubs, winning dance contests, and generally being kind of like a flapper everywhere around town. Paris Hilton did not invent being famous for being famous.
Absolutely.
This strategy worked. She was in the papers all the time, the society papers and whatever. And so MGM started giving her bigger roles. Crawford set her eyes on overtaking the studio's biggest star, Norma Shearer. A pretty tall order since Shearer was Irving Thalberg's wife and Irving Thalberg was the head of production at MGM.
Not for long. No, sorry.
I mean, true, he did die tragically young. Anyways, as mentioned, we last saw her back in 1927 for Todd Browning's The Unknown. There, she co-starred with Lon Chaney, and she later said that Chaney was the one who taught her what acting was, and that it was different from just standing in front of the camera.
Mm-hmm.
Our Dancing Daughters in 1928 made her a star, establishing her early screen persona as a glamorous party girl flapper. When MGM switched to sound in 1929, Crawford locked herself in her room and read aloud all of her books and magazines until she had rid herself of her Southwestern accent.
Sure.
She just would read them all in like a, neutral transatlantic or whatever until she got it right. And she would like go back if she made a mistake.
That's wild, especially because she did it by herself.
Yeah. As she transitioned to sound, she also transitioned away from flapper roles into like sophisticated leading lady roles, often opposite Clark Gable. From 1929 to 1933, Crawford was married to Douglas Fairbanks Jr., the son of Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford, so kind of like Hollywood royalty. That marriage ended up falling apart. They divorced over what Crawford said was cruelty, which was kind of a common code word in divorce proceedings of that time. And from 1935 to 1939, she married her second husband, Franchot Tone, who was one of her co-stars and kind of a leading actor of the time. During that marriage from 35 to 39, she worked tirelessly to promote him and raise his star, but Tone just wanted to be an actor. Like, he was interested in acting for acting's sake, and being a movie star didn't really interest him. And Crawford didn't really understand that. Like, she was in this to be a star, and acting, being a good actress was, this thing she had learned afterwards and came secondary, right? Not that she wasn't a good actress, but like just in terms of where her priorities lay, right? So she eventually tired of the effort she was putting in to try and raise up his career, and that led to resentment, and that led to the divorce. Much later in life, they became friends again, although Crawford turned down his proposal to remarry him in 1964. Although Life magazine proclaimed her Queen of the Movies in 1937, in 1938, the Independent Theater Owners Association of America took out a full-page ad in the Hollywood Reporter dubbing Crawford and 6 other actors box office poison, defined as talented performers whose high salaries did not translate to high ticket sales and thus were hurting exhibitors. Crawford's career slumped after this. It sort of became like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Her movies started really bombing at the box office, despite having critically acclaimed roles in films like A Woman's Face, where she sort of plays kind of a Two-Face-like character, like from Batman. Half her face is scarred and she almost turns evil and then redeems herself at the end. In 1943, after a string of these flops and failures, Crawford was released from her contract at MGM, with the studio buying her out for $100,000. In 1940, Crawford adopted her daughter, Christina. Now, California law at the time wouldn't let a single mother adopt, so she had to go to Las Vegas to make that adoption. And in 1941, she married actor Philip Terry, and the two adopted a boy who they named Christopher. The boy's birth mother had given him up because he was the product of an affair she had had with the neighbor. But when she found out that it was Joan Crawford who had adopted her son, she started trying to blackmail Crawford for money. So to get herself out of that situation, Crawford gave Christopher back to his birth mother. That didn't really go well because the mother's husband rejected the boy and threw the baby against a wall.
Holy fuck.
So the kid had a ruptured hernia and got taken away from those two and was readopted by a loving family and went on to have an ordinary life, basically, and didn't really know any of this part of his own backstory until way later when he was an adult.
Oh, that's so fucked.
But the loss of him really severely hurt Crawford. She felt so bad that she had given him up to what was ultimately an abusive home, and then so bad that he did get adopted, but not by her, right? By these other people. She felt totally devastated. So eventually she and her husband adopted a second son who was named Philip Terry Jr. But after Crawford divorced Terry in 1945, she renamed Philip Terry Jr. to Christopher. No pressure.
Yeah.
Crawford was a big supporter of charitable causes. She gave money her whole life to hospitals, to the Red Cross, to medical foundations. She gave generously during World War II to support soldiers and nurses. And after she died, it was revealed that she had been secretly spending her money her whole life to pay for the medical bills of people in the film industry who couldn't afford it.
Wow.
And she never told anyone, never told the people she was benefiting anything. It was just nobody knew until after she died. In 1943, she signed with Warner Brothers for a $500,000 signing bonus, and she had to really lobby hard for the title role in Michael Curtiz's classic film noir Mildred Pierce in 1945.
Classic.
It was a role that a lot of people were unwilling to take because she, as a character, has a teenage daughter in the movie, and a lot of Hollywood actresses were like, well, if I have a teen daughter, that's going to imply that I'm old, and they didn't want that. So Crawford really had to lobby for it because Curtiz didn't really believe in her as an actress at that time. But Mildred Pierce became one of her best remembered roles. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress for it, and it reignited her career into a new phase, changing her screen persona once again. She became the essentially good-hearted, hard-working martyr. She received a second Oscar nomination for Possessed in 1947 and a third for Sudden Fear in 1952. She left Warner Brothers that year to become a freelancer, and she continued appearing in hits like Torch Song, Johnny Guitar, and Autumn Leaves. In 1947, Crawford adopted twin girls, Kathy and Cynthia. Her son Christopher frequently ran away and was ultimately sent to military school. Crawford remarried in 1955 to Alfred Steele, the president and chairman of the board of Pepsi-Cola.
Oh.
Just as she had in previous marriages, Crawford loyally supported her husband, becoming a brand ambassador for Pepsi. When Steele died in 1959, Crawford took his seat on the board, and she remained on the board of directors for Pepsi until she retired in 1973. Now, her career was flagging again by the late 50s, largely due to, as I mentioned, a dearth of roles for a woman of her stature and age. She could take roles for women her age, but they weren't leads like she kind of should be getting for someone of her caliber. So she was hunting for projects with Robert Aldrich when the opportunity of Baby Jane came knocking. Now, around this time, Christopher got married at age 18, and he had a daughter the next year. In 1961, he took the baby to go meet Crawford, and he said, hey, here's your grandmother, Joan. And Crawford said, I'm no one's grandmother, I'm Aunt Joan. And Christopher was like, well, but she's your grandchild. And Crawford said, no, you're adopted. So offended, Christopher did not speak to his mother again until his second daughter was born in 1973. That child was born prematurely, and he needed money for a blood transfusion operation for the infant, so he called up Crawford and asked for help. She told him that she didn't have any granddaughters because he was adopted. So Christopher never spoke to her again.
That's wild.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like a real, unexpected move, given everything you've said up to this point.
Christopher would later say that he felt that she never cared about him as a person.
Do you think that's because he was Christopher, or do you think that is how she felt about all of her adopted children?
So that opens a can of worms that I think we're going to have to cover in another episode. Very famously, her daughter Christina wrote a memoir, Mommy Dearest, after Crawford passed away, which was basically a tell-all about how Joan Crawford was an alcoholic, abusive mother and beat her and beat Christopher and was terrible and awful. And the reason why that's a can of worms is the twin girls, the younger twin girls, Kathy and Cynthia, were like, what are you fucking talking about? They're like, she was the best mother anyone could have ever had. All of her friends were like, this is crazy. I never saw any of this. The only person who was really on Christina's side was Christopher, but this book came out after Crawford died, and both of them got disinherited by Crawford in her will when she died. So that's a can of worms. It's complicated. And I think we're going to have to talk about that on another episode, because we are going to be seeing more of Joan Crawford on the show from this point on, in fact.
Okay.
But yeah, I think, Christopher said that he felt she never cared about him as a person. I think he was a replacement.
Yeah.
And so, he could never live up to that. And so I think he was never as good as what she wanted him to be, I think. I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's evidence with like him constantly running away. But, families be complicated.
The other thing I know is that like Joan Crawford was super sensitive about her age. Even at this point in like 1961, Bette Davis told a story on TV while promoting this movie that, and I'll talk a little bit about this more later, Warner Brothers had turned down the chance to produce this movie. And according to Davis, Jack Warner had allegedly said, "I'm not spending a nickel on these two old broads." And after that aired on TV, Crawford called Davis and said, "Never call me an old broad ever again." And so the part of that story with Christopher's first daughter that stands out to me is him being like, "This is your grandmother," and her being like, "No, I'm Aunt Joan."
Yeah.
Anyways, back to the movie. Crawford knew that while the title role of Baby Jane Hudson was the meatier of the two roles that the story revolved around, she wanted to play Blanche because it matched her image a lot better as the essentially good-hearted, long-suffering martyr, right? That was her character style. And she felt that her old fellow Warner Brothers star, Bette Davis, was perfect for Baby Jane because it matched her character style of unsympathetic, ugly, stubborn, determined bitch.
Bit of a backhanded compliment.
Yeah. But she insisted to Aldrich that Bette Davis be cast. Like, it was Crawford's idea to get Davis into the movie. And she said she'd always wanted to act with Davis in a movie. So that gets us to the fact that a lot of the story of this movie gets tied up in the story of the feud or rivalry between Crawford and Bette Davis. And I'll tell these stories in a bit, but something worth pointing out is that even when they were at the same studio, they were never professional rivals because they didn't compete for the same roles.
Mm-hmm.
Their screen personas were too different. So they were never like up for the same part. They weren't rivals in that professional kind of way. This was, it's not business. It's strictly personal. Ruth Elizabeth Davis was born in 1908 in Lowell, Massachusetts. She was called Betty from early on, although she started spelling it with an E after reading the novel La Cousine Bette by Balzac.
Mm-hmm.
When she was 18, she saw a production of Henrik Ibsen's The Wild Duck, starring Blanche Yerka and Peg Entwistle as Hedwig. And she later said that like the whole reason she became an actress was because of seeing Peg Entwistle. That was in 1926 that she saw that play. And she decided, I'm going to be an actress. By 1929, she was playing Hedwig herself opposite Yerka.
Wow.
So she got there in 3 years.
Yeah.
In 1930, she and her mother went out to Hollywood to screen test for Universal. She failed her screen test. Famously, Universal was like, we don't see a movie star here. So instead, she got a job as a stand-in in screen tests to other actors, which she hated.
Sure.
Carl Laemmle was going to fire her, but Karl Freund thought she had lovely eyes, and so he cast her in Bad Sister in 1931.
There's a whole song about it.
Exactly. Over the next year, she made 5 more films for Universal, none of which were hits, so Universal dropped her contract. She was about to move back to New York when she was cast in Warner Brothers' film The Man Who Played God, starring George Arliss, who picked her. He had seen her in other movies and was like, this is who I want for this movie. She won a 7-year contract with Warner Brothers after that, credited George Arliss for giving her a career, and she ended up staying with Warner Brothers for 18 years.
Sure.
She married her first husband, Harmon Oscar Nelson, in 1932, but the fact that she made more money than him strained their relationship. He was really embarrassed, I guess, by this. He insisted that she couldn't buy a house until he could afford to pay for the house, but she literally made 10 times what he made.
That's wild.
So that kind of strained relationship led to their divorce in 1938.
Yeah, I would say so.
Now, in her early roles at Warner Brothers, she was given kind of the standard glamour treatment and made up to be sexy and alluring, which she totally hated. Her 1933 film, Ex-Lady, was a box office flop, supposedly because opening day was also the same day that news of Joan Crawford's divorce from Douglas Fairbanks Jr. hit the papers, and that supposedly like overshadowed anyone caring about Ex-Lady. But the fact of the matter is that Davis hated the movie and considered it one of her worst performances, one of her worst movies. So I don't quite buy this origin story of the Crawford-Davis feud, but it is one of several.
Okay.
It was in 1934 that Davis's breakthrough occurred. She appeared in the role of Mildred Rogers in Of Human Bondage, a vicious, mean-spirited bitch who dies poor and of tuberculosis at the end of the movie. Davis learned a Cockney accent, and she insisted she be appropriately haggard for her death scene. She ultimately did her own makeup for it.
Okay.
And she might be like the first example of an actress uglying up for a role to prove they can act, which has kind of become a cliche thing now.
Yeah.
It totally worked. Of Human Bondage got mass critical acclaim. That she wasn't nominated for an Oscar that year was considered a huge snub. Like, it was a big scandal. A ton of actresses were like, what the fuck? And it led to a change in how Oscar voting was done.
Oh.
To handle the controversy, the Oscars said that anyone who wanted to could nominate a write-in candidate if they didn't want to vote for any of the people nominated. The idea being that, like, you know, if you want Bette Davis to win, then write her name.
Yeah.
She still didn't win, and only one Oscar ever won a write-in ballot, which was that year. And the next year, they changed how the voting was done again to the way it's done now, actually.
Not quite, because now they have to watch the movies.
But like, that was when 1935 is when like PricewaterhouseCooper came in and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm just being a bitch.
Okay.
I'm inspired by Bette Davis.
The next year, 1935, she won for her role in the film Dangerous, although many saw it just as like a consolation prize for not having won in 1934. She would later claim that like the Oscar was named after her husband, Harmon Oscar Nelson. But that's not the story the Academy Awards tells. They have a different origin for why it's called an Oscar. Now, in making Dangerous, she fell in love with her co-star, Franchot Tone, who, after making the film, went on to marry Joan Crawford later that same year. She didn't really expect to win the Oscar. She didn't think her performance in Dangerous was like all that good. So she just wore like a very plain dress to the ceremony. When they called up her name, she passed by Crawford's table where she was sitting with Tone. And Crawford apparently commented, "What a lovely frock," to Betty as she walked by to get the award.
Okay.
That's another origin of the feud, is about like Crawford stealing Tone, or this like dig at her dress at the Oscars, etc. As Davis's career picked up in the late 1930s, she began asking for more and more money. And when the studio wouldn't agree to $3,500 a week, it ultimately spiraled out of control into a court case where Warner's basically said she's in breach of contract. Davis tried to get out of the contract, claiming that like she was restricted by Warner Brothers and all these things. The court ultimately found in Warner Brothers' favor and basically said like, the only way you are being in any way restricted is that you want more money. And that's not like, you're not being hard done by. That's not like grounds for breaking this contract. And this led to Davis getting kind of a reputation as like ungrateful, like biting the hand that feeds her kind of thing.
Sure.
In 1938, she won her second Oscar for Jezebel, where she plays kind of like a unsympathetic Southern belle. And that began a string of 5 years in a row where she was nominated for the Oscar for Best Actress. She began a relationship with Jezebel director William Wyler, who she later called the love of her life. And she also had an affair with Howard Hughes, but who didn't? And because of Jezebel, she was actually the popular favorite among audiences to get cast for Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind.
Oh, okay.
But she lost the role to Vivien Leigh, and also lost the Oscar to Vivien Leigh that next year. After she divorced her first husband, she kind of channeled her grief at her divorce into her incredible performance in 1939's Dark Victory. And then she underwent another big physical transformation by shaving off her eyebrows and her hairline and wearing very unflattering makeup to play an accurate version of Elizabeth I in Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex, where she was like playing a woman twice her age, basically.
Yeah. That's a wild movie. Seeing her in it, I mean.
During this period, which was the same period where Crawford was being called box office poison, Davis was named one of the top 10 money-making stars for film exhibitors. During this period, she made so much money and had so much control over her choice of projects. Like, she got to choose her scripts, choose the director, choose the cast, choose the writer, that she was often referred to as the Warner sister.
Oh, that's funny. I thought that was Dot, though.
Yes, on the cartoon. She married her second husband, Arthur Farnsworth, in 1940 and continued to appear in acclaimed films like The Letter and The Little Foxes, although that film ended her relationship with William Wyler when he asked her to emulate the performance of another actress. She didn't take kindly to.
Yeah. She's like, this is me. I'm in it. This is how I'm acting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In 1941, Davis became the first female president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. That's the Academy and Academy Awards. But her radical ideas to reform the organization met with resistance, and she resigned when she realized that she had never been expected to do real work. They thought she would just kind of be a figurehead. In 1942, she received her 7th Oscar nomination for Now Voyager, one of her most popular performances. Farnsworth, her second husband, died of a skull fracture from falling downstairs in 1943, leaving Davis distraught. She lashed out and misbehaved on set on her next picture, something that she often did when she was unhappy. She was the kind of person who, if she's miserable, wanted to make everybody else miserable too. Despite the troubled set, that film, Mr. Skeffington, was another hit and got Davis another Oscar nomination, bringing the total to 8 if anyone's counting. When Joan Crawford came to Warner Brothers in 1943, she attempted to mend fences with Davis by sending flowers and gifts to Davis's dressing room. But Davis rejected and returned them all, calling them lesbian overtures. Davis believed that Crawford was in love with her, and that's why they had this rivalry, because Davis was very much heterosexual, and she thought that Crawford was never in love with Franchotone. She just wanted to steal him away from Davis because Crawford wanted Davis. That was the narrative in Davis's head. Anyways, in 1945, she married William Sherry, her third husband, who attracted her because he had never heard of her before and therefore wasn't intimidated by her.
Oh, interesting. Wait, you mean her presence itself wasn't intimidating to him?
Yeah, I guess.
She seems like someone who's a force of nature.
No kidding. In 1947, she gave birth to a daughter, Barbara Davis Sherry, who's always referred to as BD. She contemplated quitting acting to focus on being a mother, but she decided to continue to work, though her popularity started to decline in this period, and her films started to lose money, and she began to notice softer lighting on her film sets meant to disguise her age. Her 1949 film Beyond the Forest was such a disaster that Davis asked to be released from her contract, and Jack Warner agreed.
Wow.
However, one of her first roles as a freelancer, as aging Broadway star Margot Channing in 1950's All About Eve, was universally acclaimed as one of her greatest performances, earning her 9th Oscar nomination. And she fell in love with her co-star on that movie, Gary Merrill, and divorced William Sherry in order to marry him. Merrill adopted BD, and together they adopted a baby girl they named Margot and a boy they named Michael. In 1952, she earned another Oscar nomination for playing an over-the-hill actress in The Star, a role widely considered to be based on Joan Crawford.
Oh.
And kind of a mean-spirited attack on Crawford. The writers of the script were friends of Crawford's, like close friends, who had a falling out with Crawford when their teen daughter wanted to get married against their wishes. And the daughter ran over to Crawford's house and told her, and Crawford agreed to host the wedding.
Wow.
So they had an axe to grind, and they did this movie, and Bette Davis was like, oh, we're shitting on Joan Crawford? Sign me up, basically. However, in the late 50s, Davis's career began to stall as her performances became increasingly criticized for being over the top, for her age working against her. People started saying like she was acting like she was doing an impression of Bette Davis. Her personal life also started unraveling. Margot was found to have brain damage and had to be institutionalized at age 3. And her marriage to Gary Merrill started deteriorating, and they divorced in 1960. Later in life, BD would say that like it was around this time that Davis started like drinking and kind of becoming a bit of a terror around the house. But like with Christina Crawford, that's a can of worms that we're going to open in a later episode.
Okay.
At this point, she tried to like return to theater, but that didn't go well. She didn't really have the like constitution, I guess, for like long theatrical runs, performing like every night kind of thing, right?
Sure.
And that left Bette Davis, like Joan Crawford, like Robert Aldrich, badly in need of a hit, of the kind that just didn't typically come to an actress in her 50s. So Crawford wanted Davis to play the role of Jane, and she sent Aldrich out to convince her. Davis had been aware of the book, but she was reluctant to take the role because she disliked horror movies. What made her take the meeting with Aldrich was the simple fact that she needed the money. She agreed to the film on 3 conditions. 1, that she play Jane, which Aldrich was like, cool, of course. 2, that she receive 10% of the profits. 3, that Aldrich wasn't sleeping with Crawford.
Okay.
Davis flat out told Robert Aldrich, she was like, oh, Joan always sleeps with her directors to get like preferential treatment. And if she's sleeping with you, like then you won't be able to direct me in an unbiased way. So I don't want to work in that environment. And Aldrich told her that he was not sleeping with Crawford, even though the offer had been made.
Oh.
So assured on all 3 fronts, she agreed to the film. Lucas Heller wrote the screenplay adaptation of the book. He was born to a Jewish family in Germany in 1930, but his family left the country in 1933. His dad was a philosopher and not of the kind that Hitler liked. And he ultimately was raised in Britain. He'd written like a handful of British crime dramas before working on Baby Jane, but this was like his first big movie, and it began a long collaboration with Aldrich. After the movie became a hit, Henry Farrell tried to arbitrate with the Writers Guild for screenplay credit on the movie, on the basis that he had written a play adaptation and that the movie used a lot of the play adaptation, and therefore it's like he wrote a script for the movie. And the Writers Guild was like, nah, dog, that's not how that works. And he did not get screenplay credit on this movie. It just is Lucas Heller, not Henry Farrell.
That's wild. That didn't come up in any of my research.
Yeah. What's really interesting is then the 2 of them collaborated on Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte later.
Yeah.
So although both actresses chose to waive their regular high fees in exchange for a percentage of profits, Crawford was getting 15%, by the way. Aldrich found it really difficult to find funding for the film. 4 studios, including Warner Brothers, turned the movie down, calling Crawford and Davis unbankable and suggesting Aldrich cast younger actresses. The day was saved when the Seven Arts production company agreed to finance the film on a $1 million budget.
Okay, that's, pretty good.
It's low for a Joan Crawford and Bette Davis movie.
Yeah, but it's high for a horror movie of this type.
Yeah. This was an A picture, but it was like a low budget A picture. They didn't have the money to do rescreen projection for the driving scenes, so they had to like do the driving scenes for real. I'll talk about that more a little bit later. They also Aldrich basically edited the film in camera. Like he didn't shoot a lot of coverage because he just didn't have the time to do a ton of editing in post-production. Like they couldn't afford the lab time and stuff.
And film is very expensive.
Yes. Now, when the project was finally announced, public attention and hype was high. Like, oh, Bette Davis and Joan Crawford in the same movie. And the press immediately began speculating on the feud and on-set rivalry and how's this going to go down? They hate each other. Davis and Crawford did numerous interviews saying that no such feud existed, praising each other for being professional and, praising each other as actresses and all this kind of stuff. This was all before production started. I think this was largely to calm people down because you didn't want it being said that the movie was going to be a disaster, right?
Yeah, this is a very professional PR smoothing of the public.
Exactly. Warner Brothers agreed to distribute the movie, and Jack Warner hosted Crawford and Davis for lunch as an apology. So there are other people in the cast.
I should think so.
For this movie. I don't have time to talk about a lot of them, but I did want to call out Maddie Norman, an African-American actress who plays the maid, Elvira Stitt, who ended up rewriting all of her dialogue on set because a lot of her dialogue was very yes'm. And she was like, we don't talk like that anymore.
Yeah.
That's slave times talk. I'm not talking like that. The supporting role of Edwin Flagg, remember him from the plot summary, was played by 24-year-old actor Victor Buono after actor Peter Lawford dropped out, fearing the film would tarnish his reputation because he was JFK's brother-in-law, father-in-law. He was related to the Kennedys and wanted a sparkling, clean image at the time. Buono was the son of a former cop turned murderer, robber, smuggler who served 2 life sentences in prison. But anyways,
whoa.
Buono got really good reviews for his performance as Falstaff on stage at age 20. And that led Warner Brothers to bring him to Hollywood. This was his first film role and began his successful career as a character actor. Now, due to his heavyset build, he often played characters much older than himself, and one of his best remembered roles is as the villainous King Tut on the 1960s Batman TV show.
Oh, yeah, they liked to show King Tut a lot.
Yeah.
He's not an interesting character, but they kept having King Tut episodes.
Well, he's great the first time. The problem is that he's got one shtick, so they just repeat the same thing every time.
Yeah.
Another minor role, this one of the Hudson sisters' teen neighbor, was played by Beatty Merrill, Davis's own teen daughter. Beatty had no ambitions of being an actress. It was kind of Davis's idea that she do this cameo. Joan Crawford's daughter, Christina, really wanted to be an actress. Now, Davis insisted that the film be shot in black and white because color would be too pretty, and this isn't a pretty story. As she had done in the past, she created her own makeup for her look as Jane, believing that no Hollywood makeup man would make her frightful enough. The concept was a kind of aged Mary Pickford look, with Davis believing that Jane never washed her face and just put another layer of makeup on each morning. Beatty said upon seeing her, "Oh, mother, you've gone too far this time." But when Henry Farrell visited the set, he exclaimed that Davis looked just as he pictured the character. Now, despite assurances that there was no feud and that both actresses were perfect professionals, numerous stories emerged about difficulties on set between the two. These provided great publicity for the picture, and to this day, the rivalry provides a great hook for people to want to watch this movie. Like, oh, they're playing these two characters who hate each other, and they hated each other in real life, and like, you're just going to see all that come out, and yada, yada, yada. For this reason, I have always viewed stories of the feud, especially ones of like, oh, here's why they hated each other before the movie, with some skepticism.
Absolutely.
I have kind of, I have a grain of salt attitude towards all of this, because it's like, oh, here's the backstory of why they hated each other beforehand. Even though they had no professional rivalry, right? Here's all this stuff that happened on set, a lot of which came out in like interviews after the movie, and the press was like really into this idea of the rivalry and really played it up. However, I will report all the stories here, as if they were true facts, because I wasn't there. I just am saying at this time that like I've always
take these with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I've always kind of viewed this with some skepticism. Now, it was clear from day one that Crawford and Davis were very different styles of actress. While Davis reveled in like looking ugly and doing all the like physical acting and stuff, it took a large degree of convincing from Aldrich to get Crawford to let go of her glamorous image. She initially expected like hair, makeup, and costume treatment similar to what she had always had, even though she was playing a character who was shut up in her room for 20 years and was a paraplegic and was emaciated and not eating right and all of this kind of thing. Crawford didn't like getting physical. She didn't want to do any of the more physically intensive or violent scenes. But the movie didn't really have like money for stunt doubles of 50-year-old women. And, Davis loved these scenes. She really liked the driving scenes because she got to go out into the very real LA streets driving in full Jane makeup and just freaking people out. And she loved that. Crawford supplied the entire cast and crew with Pepsi for the duration of the duration of the shoot. Aldrich would smuggle Coke onto set as a prank. Davis believed that Crawford was spiking her Pepsi with vodka, and that it was for this reason that Crawford insisted on a climate-controlled set that was like always kind of chilly, because alcoholics tend to like sweat really easily in heat. And she knew that like Crawford didn't want to be seen to be sweating. And this is also the reason why for the movie's finale on the beach, all of the shots that are Jess Davis are on location on the beach, but shots that have Blanche in them, or the two of them, are on a soundstage.
Wild.
Now, the two reportedly called each other names constantly. I think it was Davis who called Crawford this, or maybe it was the other way around, but one of them called the other a phony cunt on stage.
Amazing.
And they would also call Aldrich each night to complain about each other to him.
Now that I believe.
In one scene, Jane kind of kicks Blanche in the head, and Davis took the opportunity to kick Crawford for real. In retaliation, Crawford weighed down her clothes with rocks for the scene where Davis had to drag her unconscious body around. So this is the kind of stuff. These are the stories.
Very petty.
Yes. Nevertheless, the two hyped each other up in the press because they both needed the movie to succeed financially. They were both only getting paid off the profits, right?
They might be petty, but they're still professionals.
Crawford said in interviews that she predicted Bette Davis would win the Oscar for this role. And she said she had no problem with that because she knew that Jane was the more attention-getting role when she took the part of Blanche. But she knew that like the best thing for the movie was for her to play Blanche and Davis to play Jane, right? So, very magnanimous. One fun detail is because, in the movie they're playing old movie stars, and in real life they were movie stars. They get to use footage from like real old Joan Crawford movies, real old Bette Davis movies, because the story has to be that Jane was a bad actress when she tried to go into film. They only used footage from Bette Davis's like pre-Of Human Bondage movies, specifically Ex-Lady and another movie that she hated called Parachute Trooper or something like that. Basically just Davis was like, these are the movies that I was the worst in, so you can use these ones. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane premiered on Halloween 1962.
Nice.
In Cincinnati, before opening in cities around the U.S. in the following weeks. Davis visited 17 theaters in 3 days around New York City to promote the picture, and she took out a humorous ad in the trades for her services as a bankable actress.
Wow. Petty.
The movie was a box office smash hit. It earned its money back in 2 weeks, and it ultimately earned $9 million in the US. Critical reviews were mixed, with critics calling the film a grotesque caricature, comparing it negatively with the works of Hitchcock, calling it hacky with like directing that was full of cliches. That said, the reviews that didn't attack the stars for going over the top did praise Davis's commitment and Crawford's restraint. I think this is a case of, it's got Joan Crawford and Bette Davis in it, so it must be like an A movie, so we're going to review it like it's that. And then it's like, oh, it's kind of like a weird gothic horror movie and isn't that crass, was kind of the reaction, right?
Yeah.
Now, today, the film is regarded much more highly, even if many enjoy it more as camp.
Yeah.
But it is also seen as a classic, and it certainly rejuvenated its stars' careers. Its success also spawned the psycho-biddy subgenre, with many follow-ups aping it, including Aldrich's own follow-up, Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte, 2 years later. As you mentioned, it got remade as a TV miniseries in 1991, and the production of the movie itself was retold in the 2017 miniseries Feud. It was nominated for 5 Oscars: Best Actress for Bette Davis,
Classic,
Best Supporting Actor for Victor Buono, Best Black and White Cinematography for Ernest Haller, who had shot Bette Davis in Jezebel and Joan Crawford in Mildred Pierce, Best Sound, and Best Black and White Costume Design, which it won.
Nice.
Davis called Crawford after seeing the movie for the first time and praised how good the picture was and how good Davis was in it. Crawford was offended that Davis had no compliments for her, and she accused Davis of hogging the spotlight after getting the Oscar nomination without ever giving Crawford credit for her performance or indeed for casting Davis.
Wow.
So at the Oscars that year,
oh, I can tell by your face this is going to be good.
Crawford secretly arranged with several of the other Best Actress nominees that if they were to win, but let's say they happened to be absent that night and couldn't attend the ceremony, that she could go up and collect their award for them.
Oh, girl, no. What the fuck?
Now, Davis thought she was a shoo-in to win. They started announcing the winner, and she started clasping her purse closed and started getting up. But the award went to Anne Bancroft for her performance in The Miracle Worker. Bancroft was indeed absent that night, so Crawford pushed past Davis, saying, "Sorry, I have an Oscar to collect," and went up and took the statue and gave a speech and then posed with it for pictures with all of the other winners as if she had won it herself.
Wow.
And so the feud continued.
No, 100%. If they didn't have a feud before, they absolutely have one now.
To be continued in our episode on Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte.
Wow. So, I watch Charlotte Dobre videos where she, reads Reddit stories and, we talk about pettiness and all that. This is, a whole other level.
Oh, yeah.
Holy moly.
These bitches be catty.
Oh, absolutely. My goodness. Well, thank you, listener, for hanging out with us for this long. If they want to watch this movie, how can they do that?
Whatever Happened to Baby Jane is available on Blu-ray from Warner Archive Collection, and it's also available to rent on iTunes and Amazon Prime.
Okay, awesome. So fairly readily available. You're going to hear a brief musical interlude, and when we come back, we will find out whatever happened to Baby Jane from 1962, directed by Robert Aldrich.
See you on the other side, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to Scream Scene. We just finished watching Whatever Happened to Baby Jane from 1962, directed by Robert Aldrich. So I've seen this before, obviously, but Sarah, this was your first time.
Yeah.
What did you think?
I don't think I liked it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I think it's because I had a little bit of a strong reaction to it.
Okay.
But I mean, that's what it's trying to do, so it like is effective.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't think I particularly enjoyed the movie.
Okay. I like this movie a lot.
Okay.
In the sense that, like, I think it's a very good movie.
Sure.
So I anticipate maybe some ranking difficulties in our future.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Because just as much as like I didn't really enjoy the movie, I do recognize that like it is a very good movie. It's doing a lot of really good things. I do think like there's some things that it kind of struggled with a little bit here and there, made some choices that I'm not sure if they were the best choice to make. But honestly, I think my reaction and dislike of the movie is also a sign that it was an effective horror movie.
Sure. Okay. Interesting. Well, we'll have to dig into that a little bit more later. First up, we've got the plot synopsis, although it is pretty close to the book.
Fairly. Yeah, relatively the same. We begin in 1917 with Baby Jane doing a performance, and it's like sold out and people really want to go see her. Not quite to Beatlemania levels, but definitely a vaudeville star. She has a signature life-size porcelain doll, which I'm sure the movie doesn't mean for it to be creepy.
Oh, no, I totally think it's meant to be a little creepy.
Okay. You know, people like porcelain dolls.
Yeah.
Those people have a different opinion of what's creepy than I do.
Yeah. And like dolls from that period do look really weird and creepy now, for sure, having like seen some antique dolls, but
yeah,
it's what people had.
And she also sings her, I would say like a signature song, I'll Send a Letter to Daddy.
Yeah, which is like the most calculatingly saccharine song that you've ever heard.
It reminds me of, I think it's called Baby Shoes or Christmas Shoes.
It's exactly like Christmas Shoes, where it's like, it's supposed to be kind of sad, but also kind of like cute at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We see a little bit of the dynamic between Blanche and Jane, as well as Blanche and their father, namely that Blanche is kind of sidelined and also bullied. And her mom tells Blanche, like, don't worry, like in the future, you're going to be a big star. I can see it. But remember that like when you have everything, to please be kind to Jane. Don't treat her like she treats you.
Mm-hmm.
Then we cut to 1935. Blanche indeed has a film career. Jane, unfortunately, her film career is a bit of a bomb, and it's both related to and a cause of her becoming an alcoholic. Blanche, like I said, is a rising star. She has multiple hits back to back to back, and we get some like back and forth between these two like film executives talking about how Blanche is about to buy this really big house. She can remodel it however she wants. And then it seems like that night is when we get this mysterious car crash. We see a woman driving a car kind of towards a gate, like where it would open up outside of a driveway. A woman goes to be in front of the gate to like unlock it, and the woman driving hits the gas to try to run this person over. she ends up crashing into the gates, and this is the crash that causes Blanche to be paralyzed.
One thing that I think is really clever here is if you don't know the twist already, right? If you're going into this movie totally cold. So this whole sequence, they never show you anyone's faces. It's just like hands and feet. So you get the sense of the action, like it's from the neck down kind of thing. But I don't think that reads to a first-time audience as being mysterious or setting up any kind of mystery or obfuscating anything. It just reads as like, oh yeah, because we don't have Joan Crawford and Betty Davis in their 30s. So we have to just have stand-ins, right? This is not the era of the Marvel de-aging prologue that we would do if we made this movie now kind of thing, right?
Absolutely. Then we cut to the present, 1962.
Yesterday.
Quote, yesterday. Throughout the movie, but I'll just kind of say them here, we get people sharing rumors about what they've heard about the Hudson sisters, namely that Jane was blamed for the accident that paralyzed Blanche, and Jane was found like 3 days later in a drunken stupor. They are living in this old mansion. We get some exposition through the neighbor that basically Blanche, her movies are getting revitalized by being shown on TV. We see that Blanche is in her wheelchair. She's confined to her bedroom on the top floor. The only visitor to the house seems to be the maid, Elvira, who urges Blanche to put Jane in psychiatric care. Tries to show that she's reading your mail. She's really controlling everything that you have access to. But Blanche is basically like, no, I want to make sure that I'm able to provide for her. I'm going to be selling the house. I haven't found a way to tell her yet, and I want her to know that she will be taken care of.
Yeah, there's kind of a implication that the escalation in Jane's like behavior for the plot of the movie is due to like Blanche's movies getting shown on TV and that kind of like reawakening a lot of old
resentment.
Yeah, exactly.
Jane actually knows about the house being sold and the plan to put her away in a negative way, as she considers. So she's been particularly cruel lately. As Ben said, her jealousy and resentment is increasing because of Blanche's old films coming on TV. And so she begins isolating Blanche and terrorizing her kind of in that escalating way. We get the serving of the pet bird. Then Jane torments Blanche by saying like, no, see, this other meal that I cooked you of pork chops is completely safe, and like eats it in front of her. Then the next meal, there's a rat under the serving dish.
Did you notice watching the movie, because you brought it up before we watched the movie, but I didn't want to talk about it until after you'd seen it. When you talked about like what you knew about this film, you mentioned like, oh, there's like a scene with coat hangers.
Oh, hey, yeah, wasn't in there. I thought there was like a whole thing about like, you need to hang my clothes in a certain way on coat hangers.
So that's from Mommy Dearest, from the film version of Mommy Dearest, the memoir that Christina Crawford wrote about her mother. So where in the movie version, she's played by Faye Dunaway. So that's getting, somehow that got confused in with what you thought about this movie at some point. And I didn't want to like say anything before the movie. I wanted to wait until after the movie to be like, hey, yeah, that's why that wasn't in there, because it's from another movie.
Yeah, that's okay. Huh.
Yeah. Well. Anyways, you were talking about all the ways that Jane torments Blanche, and it reminded me.
Jane is also isolating Blanche by like removing the telephone in the room. Now Jane decides to hire an accompanist because she wants to revive her career. That'll show Blanche. So she meets Edwin Flagg, who himself is a bit of a failing musician who lives with his mother. When he meets Jane, he pretends to have a British accent. One thing I noticed is that his mom seems to almost have an Australian accent.
It's Cockney.
It's Cockney. Okay, but so like still, like when folks from Australia came over to England, they tried to hide their accents. So just multiple layers of hiding who they truly are.
Yeah, because the accent that he puts on is not his mother's Cockney accent. It's like an RP, like upper crust accent.
Yeah. He is also overly flattering about Jane's talent because he wants to get paid. And Jane, not really understanding what wages are right now, is like, yeah, $100 a week. And he's like, yes, that'll do, I suppose.
$100 a week then is about $1,000 a week now.
Wild. Throughout the movie, we have instances of Jane going out and Blanche trying to get help. So Jane goes out, Blanche tries to get a note to the neighbor that Jane finds when she returns home and keeps for herself and taunts Blanche with it. Jane goes out and Blanche manages to get down the stairs in order to call the doctor, but Jane comes back before the call is ended and stops the doctor from coming. We kind of see through all of this how Blanche is limited by mobility, but also she's taunted as being neurotic. Like Jane calls her neurotic. I think that's a bit extreme, but she definitely has agoraphobic tendencies. She's very shy about anyone coming into the house to the point where she misses her chance to say, hey, can you help me? She's willing to trust Elvira, but it's clear that that's like a long-standing relationship. And she, at the first opportunity that she has to go down the stairs, she gets like really scared. Understandably, because stairs, but there's also, to me, it felt like there was also an element of like exiting her safe space.
I think too, what this is evidence of is like fear of Jane in like a way that would be similar to like if you thought about like an abusive relationship, which is what this is. We just don't typically think of that as between sisters, right? We think of it between partners. But that kind of thing of like being afraid to like step outside the lines because what will she do if I do, right?
Jane is also able to control Blanche because she does a very good impersonation of Blanche's voice. That's how she calls the doctor back and says, actually, never mind. Jane has also been practicing forging Blanche's signature so she can continue getting money even without Blanche there. Now, Elvira ends up discovering Blanche tied up and starving, so Jane kills her in the heat of the moment. She starts to get increasingly paranoid that people will find out. In the book synopsis, what I was reading is that she becomes overcome with guilt, and in the movie, it definitely seems more like a, oh no, I'm going to get in trouble.
Well, because a big part of it is that as Jane goes on in the movie and she tries to like revitalize her old career and then has these like really upsetting events occurring, like murdering someone, her psyche kind of fractures and she almost like reverts back into being a little girl. And so it's that guilt that kids have where you feel bad, and the way that comes out is like someone's gonna tell and then everyone will know and then they'll hate me.
Exactly. Yeah, so often she goes to her sister to say, Blanche, you need to help me. Like, what do I do? And Blanche is tied up with a gag in her mouth, so... Meanwhile, Edwin is, I'll say, getting closer. He's really just coming back because he's like, I want to foster this relationship so I get money and maybe I can manipulate her because Jane's not in her right mind. But Jane has a bit of a crush on him. So she's like excited that he's coming by. We get a couple instances of him coming by and leaving, whatever. But to sum up, Edwin is drunk and he comes in. And as he is with Jane and she's like, oh, I have a present for you, gives him the doll, weird, and then goes to get the money for him. Blanche pushes a lamp over upstairs, which draws Edwin upstairs, and seeing what's happening, he runs off. Now, in the book, what I read is that Jane tries to run him over. It seems to not be successful from what I read, but I don't know. That doesn't happen in this movie. Edwin runs off, and it seems like he eventually gets to the police. Meanwhile, Jane is afraid that he's going to tell someone, and so she decides to get Blanche, and they drive to the beach like the good old days when they were kids. By this point, Blanche has been starving for, at minimum, a week, dehydrated, like she's dying. And as she's on the beach, she confesses to Jane that Jane was not responsible for the accident. Everyone thought she was, because Blanche had pulled herself outside of the crash, but Blanche had actually tried to drive into Jane. Unfortunately, Jane is fully fallen into this child persona, and her response is like, "You mean we could have been friends this whole time?" I don't know if that's a forgiven in that same kind of sense, but it kind of shows where her brain's at right now. She decides to go get ice cream for the two of them, and Jane is seen by the cops, who have since been searching for the lost Hudson sisters. And the cops approach her, say, "Hey, can you show us where your sister is? We are very concerned." And this draws a crowd. Jane begins to perform for the crowd by dancing as the cops notice Blanche's body on the beach. So they run over to the body, but it's unclear if by this point Blanche is dead or alive. And that's how the movie ends. How many times have you seen this movie? At least 2.
At least 3.
At least 3. Okay.
Yeah.
Has your opinion of it changed since the first time you saw it? Now that we have this context of the genre history.
So I think with the context of the genre history is, I think, really important to watching this film, and is a big part of my argument for why this movie is horror, because I think there are some people who might watch this and not clock it as a horror movie, simply because, like, for a lot of it, what it really is like a character study.
Sure.
It's a really incredible character study. I really like this movie. But I think, like, understanding film history helps you see, like, why this was a horror movie in its time. Otherwise, I think the only thing that's changed about how I feel about this movie really over time is just that, like, I've gotten older and gotten, like, more emotional life experience, and that just kind of, like, changes how you think about things. Although it's, like, you know, the movie story and its emotions and the through line are all very clear, no matter what, even when I was younger and saw it the first time.
Yeah, I think if someone were to say that this isn't horror, my response would be, what do you think it is then?
Right.
Because you could say, oh, well, it's a drama. And I'm like, it leans too far into, like, really trying to, I don't know a better word for this, freak you out with the way that Betty is portraying Jane. I was going to say portraying Joan. Betty is portraying Jane.
So I noticed through the whole synopsis, you kept, like, nearly messing up the names, right? Blanche and Jane. I think there's 2 reasons for that, because I think it's a really relatable thing to do.
Okay. And I'll once you tell me, I will tell you why that kept happening.
Okay. The first reason is that Betty is playing Jane and Joan is playing Blanche.
Yes. To kind of shorthand my notes, I used B and J. So I kept accidentally in my brain as I'm reading this saying Betty and Joan instead of Blanche and Jane.
I think the other reason that's a little more subtle, but it happens in my brain, is their hair color has been switched from the book.
Yeah.
In the book, Blanche is blonde and Jane is brunette. And that makes sense. Her name
is Blanche.
Yeah, which is white, right? So, like, Blanche, blonde, right? But in the movie, like, they weren't, like, it makes sense. Like, you weren't going to have Betty Davis play Blanche and Joan Crawford play Jane. That, like, they are cast perfectly. You weren't going to, like, just for this one movie, like, switch their hair colors. That would have been silly. And I also think keeping Betty Davis's hair color so that Jane is blonde as a little girl also, I think, visually in a film fits the image of what they're evoking more. Like it's more of the Shirley Temple
100%.
vibe, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the other reason why it's easy to get the names mixed up, is because like you have one character who's basically named blonde and she's not the blonde one.
Yeah. While this is a cheap A movie, you still see the production value. You still see the quality of filmmaking, the choice of shots, the fact that we have like multiple angles of different shots, the choice of like lighting, the way that they light things and zoom in on things. So this has that like, ooh. So it's really interesting to see a cheap A movie having to do things for real, like the driving around, and how that lends that credibility that we normally see with B movies who can't afford to do it for fake.
Yeah. I think you're totally right. Like the production quality here is very high.
Yeah.
I think if there's something to be said about the cinematography and the set design and the costumes and everything, I really like the house because even though it's, definitely a collection of sets on a soundstage, you really get a clear sense of the layout and how it works and how it relates to the outside of the house. Unlike there's a lot of movies where movie houses, especially if they have a real exterior and a fake interior, kind of turn into like TARDISes a little bit.
Yeah, this feels like a real house.
Feels like a real house. It also, on the inside, especially as the movie goes on and the way the house starts getting lit more and more, like turns very gothic.
Yes.
On the inside of the house. There's a lot of smart lighting here that is both dramatic but motivated. Like I think a really clear moment is when Jane is looking at herself in the mirror and she's standing a little bit out of the like the big light
spotlight.
Yeah. In their living room. And then she steps forward into the light and it reveals like kind of just how bad she looks and she breaks down. And because it's that like harsh top-down light, it really gives it like a horror movie vibe, but it's like motivated in the scene, right?
Yeah, and when Jane is freaking out about what to do with Elvira's body, she's on the main floor and she keeps looking up towards the door to Blanche's bedroom, and it's like slightly ajar. The door itself is lit from the bottom, so it seems to be like emanating this weird glow. And so that was really amazing.
And I think, talking about whether this is horror or not, it's certainly like it's a slow burn. Like,
yeah,
Jane is, a horrible person from like moment one, but it's a slow burn until we get to the parts that are like, oh, this is a horror movie. I think if you weren't to call this horror, the thing it's most like is a thriller. Because I think, and I think this every time I see this movie, I think this movie has fantastic control of suspense editing throughout, like all the moments where it's like, Jane's out and Blanche is trying to get to the phone, and will she be able to like say what she needs to say in time before Blanche gets back? There's a few different moments that play that kind of trick of cutting between two things and you wonder if the person's going to be able to do it in time, that I think are really well done. And I think the movie does a really good job of like ratcheting up the tension throughout the movie, particularly because the movie's sort of built on almost a routine. Jane,
when does Blanche get her meals?
Right. When does Elvira come to the house? When does Edwin come to the house? We see almost like the same versions of scenes multiple times. And you can see how things have like deteriorated more and more each time, right? If I were to point to some specific things, this isn't really the kind of horror movie that's trying to scare you. Like it's not trying to like jolt you out of your seat. It's really the kind of horror movie that's trying to horrify you.
Yeah. Like in the beginnings, like maybe like kind of creep you out because Betty Davis looks a little weird. You start to feel really bad seeing this abusive dynamic between them. And then when it like becomes very intense between the sisters, even before Elvira is killed, it's like Joan Crawford does an amazing job selling despair.
Yes. And fear.
Yes.
The scene where Jane kicks Blanche around.
Yeah.
Is really horrific. And then later, the moment when I think when Elvira like opens the door to Blanche's room and sees her like bound and gagged and like emaciated, and like these scenes are really especially horrific when you remember that not only was this kind of on-screen violence to women uncommon at the time in movies, especially
women on women
and women of this age.
Yes.
Like, you don't have a lot of movies before 1962 where it's like, hey, we're going to beat the shit out of this grandma on camera and then like starve her to death and like tie her up like bound and gagged and chained. Like, that's not a thing you get in movies of this period.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that I forget the name of the trope, but it's like the psycho biddy trope of like old woman being the killer and being the terrifying thing. You see that all the way through to Weapons. I think you can see a very direct line because of the way that the witch in Weapons portrays herself as human. It's very akin to Bette Davis. Yeah. To me, it's really interesting that like Jane's supposed to be the younger sister.
Yes.
You know? I don't know how old the actresses are in relation to each other.
Bette Davis is younger.
Okay. Yeah, they do a really good job of using makeup to show how old Jane is, but also to show how Blanche's health deteriorates.
Yeah. And like, you know, the other thing with Jane's makeup is she just keeps putting more and more
on.
Yeah. And it's like at one point she does her makeup in the Baby Jane style and then like keeps that for the rest of the movie. And it's very, you know, unnerving. Yeah. Both actresses are fantastic. And I have a lot to say about both of them. But I wanted to, maybe before I dive into just a lot of like intense praise, I have like a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
The first is like, I want to ask why you didn't enjoy this, and if you would separate not enjoying the movie from not liking it, or if those are the same thing for you. Because I think often, I don't want this to sound dismissive, but like the average moviegoer conflates having a good time with liking the movie with the movie being good. And a lot of times it's like, if I had a bad time, the movie must have been bad and I must dislike it. But, you know, if you really like break everything apart and parse it down, those aren't necessarily the same things. I find Hunger a really terrible movie to watch, and I've watched it one time and I will never watch it a second time, but I don't think it's a bad movie. There are other movies like that are like not a fun time to watch, but I like them. I like that movie. You know, and then whether it's bad or good is another like third axis, right?
Yeah, I think I've been clear that like I do see the difference between whether a movie is quote good or bad and whether I liked it or not. Case in point, how I started the second half of the show. So part of why I didn't really like this movie, there's two reasons I think that are fairly general. One is personal experience of dealing with someone who is in that alcoholic spiral and the lovey approach because I need support and get the fuck away from me, you've ruined my life kind of.
That kind of two-facedness.
Yeah, and truly like a cycle, like a true spiral. And it's really hard to watch, and both in terms of like real life and then to see it on the screen, because I saw Blanche's excuses for Jane as being like, yeah, I've said that too. Oops.
Yeah.
But also I've also found myself being like, yeah, Blanche, it's bad. So fucking break the cycle. Like, because I've done the growth of like recognizing the signs.
You're like impatient with the character in the movie.
So I'm trying to like hold that kind of like, girl, just like stop.
Yeah, there was, you know,
There was one point where I was like, just call the fucking police. Like, why are you calling the doctor? Elvira, like, it's like, I'm gonna, like, unscrew the hinges instead of calling the police because the door is locked and I don't know what's happened on the other side.
Yeah.
But I think that's also a sign that, hey, this is a horror movie because you have someone yelling at the screen.
Yes,
just call the police.
I was just about to say, like, this is you engaging in classic horror movie audience behavior.
Absolutely.
I will say that, like, there's an aspect where Elvira is an African American woman in a white woman's home, and I don't know how much that affects, like, I'm going to try to save her myself before I call the police or something. But I get what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying. Yeah.
The other thing about why I didn't really like the movie is you made the point that it really controls suspense. Mm-hmm. I found it a little repetitive. And part of it might have been also the, like, well, just call the cops. Just throw the note again. Like, just write a new note and throw it, right? Just try again. And I saw that there was, like, a contemporary review of the movie and where someone was like, it goes on. And I'm like, yeah, I think I felt that. It just kind of was like, because of that slow burn, I think if it had ratcheted up a little faster. But I think that might have been a element of it adapting a book.
Sure.
We see that often outside of horror as well, of adapting a book, and you tend to accidentally
misjudge the pacing.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that, so I like the element that you're describing as not liking. I just described a little ways ago about this, like, brilliant repetition and all this. But I do also see the way that it can kind of feel like you're watching, like, a Sylvester and Tweety kind of cartoon where it's like, oh, here's this attempt to do the thing and it gets messed up in this way, and then we fade to black and we come back and here's the next attempt, right? I think here, at least, unlike some other horror movies where we've seen that repetition and been like, okay, come on, I think there's some justification because the movie gives all the characters a reason to be trapped in this house and to have very limited options. Like, this isn't a movie where it's like, oh yeah, in the first act we're in LA, but then, like, in act 2 we go to Venice, and in act 3 we're in space. Like, it's like this movie's not going to move that much, right? We're going to just be in this house with these 3 people the whole time. But I do see what you're saying. Something I noticed this time, kind of for the first time watching this movie, actually, which is really just because we watched it at home on Blu-ray, and my Blu-ray player has a time code readout right on it, is that, like, at an hour into the movie, a lot of the horror stuff hasn't happened yet. It's just kind of been the drama stuff. And I was like, wow, there's a lot that still needs to happen in this movie. And I kind of had that thought for the first time. So I totally get what you're saying. I think one other thing that this movie struggles with slightly, but I think it does an admirable job with it under the circumstances, is it has a lot of exposition it needs to get out that it can't show you.
Yeah, I think they did an admirable job as well. Like, they use the gossip mill of Hollywood. They have the neighbor talking to her daughter.
They have the scene between the 2 movie executives in the 30s.
Yeah, and I think even, like, taking the time to show people's reaction, or rather non-reaction to recognizing baby Jane, also serves as, like, exposition for where she's at.
Yeah, it does a lot of heavy lifting. I think some of those scenes occasionally start to feel a little awkward. Like, there's a scene where Edwin's mother has, like, found out who baby Jane is, and she's, like, berating him for, like, this is a crazy woman, you shouldn't be anywhere near her. And we kind of get more details on the background of the accident, and, like, oh, not only did she run her sister down, but she abandoned her there, and blah blah blah. And there's a certain point where, like, it starts to edge into feeling like, as style dialogue, but the movie doesn't really have a big choice. Like, I think if this movie was made today, and I'm not saying, so I'm not a fan of de-aging and deep fakes and AI and all that kind of stuff, but I do think that, like, ideally the 1930s scenes, you would actually want to see some of them and, like, maybe see them at that party, because Blanche talks about, like, her whole motivation for running over Jane was, like, you were super mean to me at the party and all this kind of stuff. And it would have been nice to see. But in 1962, there was no way you were going to cast other actors as Betty Davis and Joan Crawford. And so they kind of need to have people just talking about them until we're able to actually see them. And so the movie has these certain restraints, and I think the movie performs admirably despite the restraints. I think the way it uses the movie footage of both Betty Davis's old movies and Joan Crawford's old movies is really clever.
Mm-hmm.
There's a small detail around why it's clever that I think like the average moviegoer wouldn't pick up on, but someone who's been listening to this podcast for a million years might, which is the accident happens in 1935. So all of the footage of Betty Davis and Joan Crawford movies are all from like 1933, 1934. That makes them pre-code movies.
Oh, sure.
Which means that they most likely did not get regular re-releases after 1935, which means that the audience going to see whatever happened to Baby Jane wouldn't be familiar with them.
Yeah.
So you can read like, oh, that's young Betty Davis, that's young Joan Crawford. I know that they're playing these other characters, but it's not like, oh, a scene from fucking Mildred Pierce or now Voyager where you're like, oh, I guess in this universe, Blanche was in, you know, Mildred Pierce and Jane was in Jezebel, and you have all these memories associated with those particular movies, right? I think it's very clever.
Yeah. Another reason why I think like that feeling of it goes on and like that kind of pacing problem is kind of like related to it being an A movie and having these big stars. Because it's doing horror. We know it's doing horror. When Edwin first comes in, it's like comedic. We're supposed to be kind of like chuckling or like, and the music stings support this as well, of like, oh, kind of like laughing at him and laughing at his manipulation of her a little bit.
Laughing at Jane
In those scenes. And those palate cleanser style comedic elements come after a really big ramp up. Like a really big sign of despair from Blanche, or like a really intense time from another scene. And I think it's because they're like, okay, we need to like make sure people who have come here because it's these big stars are feeling okay. And so they pull back a little bit from the horror.
Interesting. I think you're right, but I identified this as something I liked rather than disliked.
Okay.
I see what you're saying, like from your perspective about it, like interrupting momentum. So this leads me into like discussing the camp element of the movie.
Oh, sure.
This movie's like a popular camp classic, and I can totally see why. Like there's sort of the performances on the part of Joan and Betty approach like drag.
Yeah, very extreme demonstrations.
And there's almost kind of like a proto John Waters aspect to this movie of like the griminess of these people and kind of being terrible to each other and flipping Hollywood on its head and all that kind of stuff. But I do think you're doing the movie a disservice if you're just coming to it to laugh at it. It's sort of like people who watch the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies just for the memes or something. I think you need to like get on the movie's level and like approach it earnestly. But that said, I do think the movie knows it's funny. And I think it's in a lot of places black comedy.
Yeah, I think especially in the early bits before the horror really hits, of seeing these two people interact.
Yes.
And in particular, Jane being catty or petty and just plain mean to Blanche because they're playing off of the feud dynamic as well.
And I think that, you know, Betty Davis is giving a very good horror performance as Jane, but I think Betty Davis knows she's funny.
Yeah.
Like, I think that first moment where she sits down on the telephone and is like, yeah, I'll get my sister. And then like holds the phone out to the air for like a little bit and is like, Blanche, like, and then comes back and is like, hello? And does the like impersonation is meant to be a laugh moment, right? And I think that the movie does use that to relieve the tension. As the movie goes on and it gets into the horror part, like I've seen this movie in a theater with an audience and people still laugh even into the ending a bit. And I think that that's because people tend to laugh at what makes them uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah.
And there's something about like how uncomfortable it makes you feel to see like this old woman in this crazy makeup kind of acting like a kid in this very like almost humiliating kind of fashion. I think the movie makes people uncomfortable, and that causes some people to laugh, but I also think it makes it a good horror movie.
Yeah, I think it's wanting to make you uncomfortable.
The other question I wanted to ask you, and I have praise. I want to get to praise, but the other question I want to ask you is, you talked about the psycho biddy genre and how it's like new to have like the old woman as the threat. And that made me think, what do you think about this movie as a response to Hitchcock's Psycho? Because in that movie, we think the threat is the old lady, and then it turns out to not be. And, we've got the famous character of Norman Bates, and we've got...
Oh, and the neighbor is named Mrs. Bates, by the way.
Yeah. And you've got like kind of the drag element and kind of the like psychological element and kind of this like, oh, there's a twist at the end and these kind of like the performance of gender and there's a lot, I think that like, I don't know. I'm curious what your read on this movie is as like a response to Psycho.
I don't know. I think it is confident in its own portrayal, that it doesn't feel the need to like sit people down and be like, so what's going on in Jane's head?
That's true. We don't get like a 15-minute explanation from a psychiatrist at the end of the movie.
Yeah. I think people are more terrified at the idea of a guy impersonating a woman. In the case of Norman Bates, he's not trying to become a woman. I believe that he's like impersonating his mother in particular.
Yeah.
Because as you were talking, you mentioned like performance of gender. And while, yes, everyone performs gender, it's not just like a transgender thing. Like literally, we are always performing gender. Shout out Judith Butler. I don't know if I see the characters performing gender in Baby Jane, because it's more about performing a persona.
Yeah, it's more age-based, right? It's an older woman performing young girl.
Well, like, yes, in the case of Jane, but I feel like everyone is wearing a persona.
Absolutely.
Because like Edwin trying to come off as like posh and whatever. And even just like more than just the accent, like his whole demeanor, he's like sneaking food. Like it's just a complete performance.
One of the reasons why like the scenes between him and Jane are so enjoyable, I think, is that they're like two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, exactly. We've talked about Jane's performance, but I also want to point out Blanche's performance, because I feel like she's performing a little bit of being the martyr.
Yes.
And I also think it's a bit of a performance of like, well, I should be nice to her because like I paralyzed myself, but also I should be nice to her because of what my mom told me.
I think there's also like when she's talking to Elvira, a performance of, oh, I'm the one in control of the house.
Yeah, and also like the amount of times that Elvira has to be like, she is reading your mail.
Yeah.
And Blanche is like, oh, these letters are open, but you said you didn't open them, so who could have done it? It's like, girl, you are not that stupid. You are performing being a space case.
There's a lot of complex psychology going on in this movie.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons why I think this movie is so good is that it all reads really true to me.
Yeah.
Like people look at this as camp and the performances as being over the top, but I think all of this reads really true to me, especially like Blanche's psychology, where it's like she needs to be so helpless that Jane will feel guilt and continue taking care of her. But,
and Elvira also is being manipulated.
But also she can't, for her own pride, I think, admit that like Jane's in control, right? Like in Blanche's mind, it's like, well, Jane's crazy and I'm not. And I'm the one in her right mind and I have the money and it's my house. So like, I'm the adult here, right? And she doesn't want to admit how much she's like under Jane's control. And she also doesn't want to admit how bad the situation is because that would mean she's not in control, right?
And ultimately, like, the dynamic between the sisters goes back to that child interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Blanche never outrightly says Jane was driving. She lies by omission, which is such a childlike way to get out of the consequences of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Not correcting people when they say, well, Jane must have been driving.
You know, I think there's a little bit more to it than that because so I don't think you see the twist coming in this movie unless you already know about it. If you already know about it, then you can see it, like it's there if you are looking for it. But I think when you're watching it for the first time, you just accept that like, oh, of course it was Jane who ran over Blanche. That's why they're like this. Like it's a very natural explanation for the setup and why they have the certain guilt and traumas that they have, right? So I don't think you see it coming. Like I said, I don't think you read the way they shoot the opening as a mystery. It's just kind of a production thing in your mind the first time you see it. But what I think makes the twist especially devastating is that earlier in the movie, Jane says it was Blanche who told her that she was driving. So, you know, maybe Blanche didn't lie to anyone else, but she lied to Jane on purpose. She didn't just let Jane think she was guilty. She told Jane she was guilty to control Jane and make it so that Jane would keep taking care of her for her whole life. And that makes Blanche just as much of a monster as Jane is, right? Like Blanche even says when she admits it, I ruined your whole life.
Yeah.
Just to get back at you, basically.
And I think also I want to point out that Blanche tells a shit ton of lies. Mm-hmm. Jane calls her out on it. And if you are totally in Blanche's favor, you're like, Jane's just making stuff up by saying like, oh, you're always lying, because how could Blanche lie? But I want to point out the house.
Okay, yeah.
So the two executives are like, Blanche is getting ready to buy this house and they are going to completely remodel it. And then that night she becomes a paraplegic. Don't you think they would have remodeled the house to not be 2 stories? The sisters have a fight about who owns the house. And Jane's like, my baby Jane money bought this house. Dad bought this house for me. Mm-hmm. And the executives also have something around the like saying of like, it's going to take a year to remodel. So I guess they'll keep living where they are now. So I feel like this is their childhood home. But Blanche has been lying like, no, I bought this house.
I think Blanche bought the house, but I do agree that there's like a bit of ambiguity there. But also like Blanche says all these lies. And because I think for the majority of the movie, you're sort of sympathetic to Blanche as the victim, it's easy to read all those lies as like she needs to say this to control Jane because Jane might fly off the handle at any moment, right? And so she lies about like the way she has done things or how things have happened. But like some of the lies are pointless.
Yeah.
Like there's this one thing where she tells Jane like, oh, I spoke to this guy on the phone earlier this week about, he said we should sell the house.
Yeah, trying to avoid the fact that she is purposely selling the house.
Yeah, it was just like, oh, our business manager told us it was the best thing to do, not she told the business manager to do it. But like when Jane says, nobody's called the house this week, she goes, oh, it must have been a letter then. And Jane's like, no, I see all the mail that comes in. And Jane says, you talked to him 4 weeks ago about it. Blanche could have started with, when I was talking to the business manager 4 weeks ago, this came up, right? She didn't need to make the lies that she did, but she's in this habit of lying to Jane.
And I think that also is like why Jane is trying to keep track of everything.
Yes.
Right? Like if you're constantly being gaslit.
Well, and you're an alcoholic too.
And you're an alcoholic.
Like
and so your memory isn't always 100%.
The whole key lie of the movie and the twist is able to happen because Jane blacked out.
Yeah.
So you have to think that for the rest of her life, she's really paranoid about what happens when I black out, right?
Yeah.
I think that Joan Crawford gives a very good performance here. One that is very much in her wheelhouse. I think you see the suffering, you see, all these little details of her psychology that we've been talking about and calling out. The way that, like, she is kind of full of herself. Like, even as a paraplegic, like when she's watching her own movies on TV and she gets so pleased with herself, she's like, damn, I was good, kind of thing, right? But this is Bette Davis's movie.
100%.
She creates a whole person here. Multiple personas too, right? Because we see the nasty Jane, we see the nice Jane who talks to Edwin, and then we see the child Jane. And one of the things that I think is so great about her regression into child Jane is that it allows Davis to do some storytelling to give us a great sense of what Jane was like as a child beyond what we see in the prologue. One of the small weaknesses in this movie, and I called out, like, I wish we could have seen them at the party and I wish we could have had more there. I also feel like because the movie's climax sort of hinges on, like, them at the beach, I wish we could have seen baby Jane and her dad dancing on the beach at the start of the movie, the way that it gets talked about in exposition later. But it's already kind of a long movie. And so even if you wanted to do all of that, it would make it, like, super long. And so when Betty becomes child Jane, it lets us see what Jane was like as a child to a greater degree. Like, the way that when things go wrong, right? Everything's going wrong. And Jane just, like, looks up at the upstairs and goes, Blanche! Like, the way that, like, a really shitty sibling who's, like, fucked everything up, like, goes and runs to their older sibling for help, right?
Yeah,
like, even though
to
it's
fix this.
Yeah, it's like, even though it's like, okay, so I'm torturing you, but you need to help me because I don't know what I'm gonna do, right? I think that Bette Davis's delivery of the line, "You mean all this time we could have been friends," is devastating.
Yeah.
Like, it's a killer line delivery. I think that one element that helps raise Davis's performance above Crawford's, depending on how you look at it, obviously, depending on what you value in acting and that sort of thing. At one point in her life, Blanche Hudson effectively was Joan Crawford.
Yeah.
So Joan Crawford is sort of playing a version of herself. Like, what if you became a paraplegic? What if for the past 30 years you were stuck in a wheelchair because you broke your spine? But in other ways, it's like, but up until then, you were still Joan Crawford movie star. Jane Hudson was never Bette Davis.
Yeah. No, she was Shirley Temple.
Right. And so in Bette Davis's performance, and even when we see her in the 30s in the clips from the Bette Davis movies, they're very much Bette Davis movies from before Bette Davis became Bette Davis.
Yeah.
Right. And so in creating Jane, Bette Davis is creating an entirely new character rather than drawing on herself in the way that Joan Crawford is doing. And I think ultimately that means that, like, you have to give the props to Bette Davis.
Yeah, I would agree. Bette Davis is someone who will go 110% into whatever the fuck she's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like, obviously, we talked about this in the context setting that Joan Crawford knew that it was the better part, right? But sometimes you got to say the obvious, I guess.
Yeah.
Some other minor things that I think let down this movie, they're very minor. I've already said a couple of them. I do think the ending is slightly let down by the soundstage shots, by intercutting the on-location stuff and the soundstage stuff. Not necessarily when Blanche is dying, although I have a funny story about that. But when Jane is dancing, and we're kind of cutting from, it's like Jane's POV dancing and seeing the people around her, and that's on location on the beach. And then when we cut to the crowd's POV watching Jane dancing, it's on a soundstage. And unfortunately, the, like, sky psych on that soundstage is very bad.
Yeah.
And I think it just slightly brings the movie down, like, right at the end. Like I said, very minor nitpick. This is a very well-produced movie in most regards. But if I'm going to, pick nits. These are the ones I'm going to pick. My funny story about that scene is that Joan Crawford wore falsies, and
Falsies?
like she padded her bra,
Okay.
fake boobs, and Betty Davis got so mad at her about it in the final scene because Blanche is lying on her back on the sand, and she's like framed in profile, and her boobs are sticking just like straight up. And Betty Davis was like, that's not what boobs look like when you're lying on your back.
She knows. She's braless through the entire movie.
Yeah. And so she just was like, everyone can tell that you're fucking padding your bra, Crawford, kind of thing. And like was very much like another example in her mind of Joan Crawford being a little vain, I guess. So that's my next time you see that scene, watch for Blanche's bust just sticking up like she's wearing a cone bra. So there's a lot more we could say about this movie. We haven't even really talked about like the themes and the way it addresses its themes, but they are themes that we've seen in a lot of other places. Sunset Boulevard comes to mind. It's a very similar ending to Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah.
It's very different structure, but like Sunset Boulevard has the same ending where she thinks she's a star again, right?
Yeah, she's ready for a close-up.
Right. But these themes of like how Hollywood and fame eat people up are something we see in a lot of different movies. It's not unique to this film. Obviously, this movie has themes about identity, right? And how you present yourself. You've already pointed that out, and we've talked about that somewhat. The movie has themes around truth and memory, right? Like the lying, but also the way that like your memory changes things, right? And it's like
fills in gaps.
Exactly. And like
also goes with what's convenient at the time.
Right. Or like, I remember that Dad bought this house kind of thing. And I think the way I think the primary theme of the movie, and it comes out in the title really, is who and what gets remembered.
Yeah.
Right? Like you talked about like all the scenes where she goes around and is like expecting people to recognize her, and then she has to be like, I'm baby Jane Hudson, and then they have to pretend like they know who that is. Everyone remembers Blanche.
Baby Jane's definitely going to be remembered after this.
Well, and yes, the gossip mill is kind of a heavy-handed way to get the exposition across, but it fits in thematically because it's about like what actually happened on the night isn't important. What's important is what does everyone remember? What's the story everyone bought?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just the thing I wanted to point out about like the key themes here.
Okay. Well, let's move on to ranking.
Okay. So you didn't like this, but did you rank it by how much you enjoyed it, or how good of a movie you thought it was, or how good of a horror movie?
How good of a horror movie? We're ranking horror movies from best to worst.
Mm-hmm.
So of course I'm going to rank it by how good of a horror movie I think it is.
Sure.
When I first started looking, honestly, I was thinking about another relatively A-picture horror movie that we saw recently, Cape Fear.
Okay.
And how that movie, it goes really hard in its horror, but it works best as horror when it allows the protagonist, played by Gregory Peck, to fully lose control.
Mm-hmm.
But because of his persona, that doesn't happen very often.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of limits how effective of a horror movie it is. It definitely is a horror movie, definitely is effective. It ranks at number 31.
Oh, wow. Real high.
Yeah. If people are curious, that was episode 344. Also came out this year. So thinking about Cape Fear, kind of worried about horror by pulling back on like how much control is lost, and thinking about the movie Baby Jane and its use of comedy to act as a palate cleanser,
Mm-hmm.
but it still goes for horror when it is going for horror. So I felt it was very comparable to Cape Fear. Looking around there, just a couple below is La Diabolique at 33. I think that this is a better movie writ large, but also a better horror movie than La Diabolique. I think they're also comparable because they spark a new approach to horror.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Looking above Cape Fear, I got a little lost because we got a lot of crazy things in here, including like Black Sunday, Son of Frankenstein, Quatermass Experiment.
There's like a stretch here between 24 and 30 where a bunch of A horror movies get interrupted by a bunch of B horror movies, and then the A horror movies start again. It's like a little weird.
Yeah. But I knew that it would not go, for me, above number 23, The Innocents.
Okay, fascinating.
Because even just thinking about like how that movie is fucked up, right? And it doesn't let up. It doesn't try to use comedy. It doesn't try to show like, no, don't worry, they have control of the situation. So to me, my range is 23 to 33.
Okay. I think we're going to end up with a spot because your range and my range have a 1 spot overlap.
Okay, tell me more.
So when I was looking, the comps that I was looking at, I thought about Psycho.
Ranked at number 1.
Right. Primarily, yes, there's some thematic things I was trying to connect here, but primarily because I think this is like similar in the sense of like the Hollywood mainstream studio machinery making a horror movie, and similar to Cape Fear and Psycho, I think what you see here is this discovery that you can make a horror movie by starting in one genre and then just pushing aspects of that genre too far.
Yeah.
Right? Where like Psycho starts out and it's about this like woman on the run who stole some money, and like, Cape Fear is there's this guy out of prison and he's harassing this lawyer, and like they're very set in the real world. This is kind of like a character drama about these 2 old sisters and whatever. And then it just gets pushed too far. And I think that's significant because for so long and for so many movies, horror was there's a castle, there's a mad scientist, there's a zombie, there's a vampire, there's aliens. Like it was very genre trappings. It was like
Pulpy,
yes, but it was also very like you have to have these like signifiers, and it doesn't take place in a real world kind of thing.
I was thinking about that in relation to Baby Jane and Weapons.
Sure, yeah.
Part of this is, we watched Weapons for the first time a couple weeks ago.
Sure.
So it's front of mind. But Ben found this review, or it might have just been commentary on the movie, talking about how it talks about the themes of alcoholism. I was thinking about how I reacted to Baby Jane's depiction of alcoholism and how much more uncomfortable I felt compared to Weapons. And it's because Weapons has a witch.
Right.
It's allegory. It has that.
There's supernatural creepiness.
Yeah, it has a bit of a buffer because of that. Whereas Baby Jane, nah.
Yeah, it's not an allegory. This just is the story,
yeah.
right? The story is about what it's about. So anyway, I thought about it in comparison to Psycho. The other 2 titles that came to mind, one was The Spiral Staircase at 7, which honestly I think just came to mind because it's like there's an old lady and there's like a house, and it's gothic, right? And then Taste of Fear at 22 came to mind because wheelchair, honestly.
Yeah, someone being fully dependent on another person and that going poorly.
Right. I think that both movies do a really good job of exploiting the fear of not being fully mobile, right? And not being able to get to things in time or go all the places you want to go. I think Taste of Fear is maybe a little bit better at exploiting that particular fear, but that's only because that's like the main thing in Taste of Fear, whereas like it's just an element of whatever happened to Baby Jane. So with those comparisons in mind, I started looking around for a range, and I thought maybe this is better than Spiral Staircase, but I don't think it's better than Peeping Tom, which is like much more of a horror movie, like totally ratchets up. The Fly also has some really great horror moments, but they're sort of encased in a lot of much more like calm filmmaking. So I made my ceiling Peeping Tom. So I thought the highest this could go was 6. And then making my way down to the other end of my comps at Taste of Fear, I thought potentially Taste of Fear was better than this because of that element of exploiting that horror better, right? And putting us in the position of that character a lot more effectively, by shooting everything at that eye level and so on. And then I looked down and I saw The Innocents, and I was like, that's also a very good horror movie. And then I looked down and I saw The Horrible Secret of Dr. Hitchcock, and I was like, what the fuck? I was like, no, this is much better than that. So I made 24 my floor. You made 23 your ceiling. So I think we just slotted in there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Because it's like, yes, I understand that Dr. Hitchcock is a B movie. It's kind of cheap. It goes hard when it tries to, and it uses color in really interesting ways and stuff. It's a very good horror movie.
It pushes the taboos hard.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel as, I'll say, intimate as Baby Jane, because it's not really in the real world.
Yeah, it's still got that like, oh, it's Victorian England.
That's true. It's not present day.
Yeah.
So you have that arm's distance as well.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, then entering the list at the new number 24 is Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. I say it that way because every time I go to write this title, I want to write whatever as one word. But it's two.
Whatever happened to
Yeah,
Baby Jane.
because it's two different meanings. Whatever is not
whatever.
right, but that doesn't mean whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, anyways, so Whatever Happened to Baby Jane from 1962, directed by Robert Aldrich, entering the list at the new number 24.
If you would like to see this list, you can go to our website, screamscenepodcast.com. There you can find links to the other episodes that we have mentioned, as well as our appeals box. If you would like to contest this or literally any other ranking, please drop us a line through our Ask box on Tumblr. You can email us directly at screamscenepodcast@gmail.com or chat with us on Blue Sky or through Patreon.
Scream Scene updates every other Wednesday on SoundCloud and a variety of other podcasting apps. If you want to make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the RSS feed. If you want to help the show out, leave us a rating or a review on the app of your choice. That tells the algorithm to push us to other people, basically. If you want to do that sort of legwork yourself, you can share the show on social media, tell your friends at work, at school, at the dinner table about the podcast, or if you really enjoy what we do, we would super appreciate it if you headed on over to patreon.com/screamscenepodcast, where you can become a patron of the night for as little as $1 a month. When you become a patron, you can do so at the $5 or $10 level as well, which gets you access to a library of bonus content. These days, the bonus content's coming out on a bit of a slower schedule than it once did once upon a time, but this show's got 351 episodes, which means we've been doing this for a long time, which means there's a huge backlog of Patreon stuff that you can get access to by signing up at those higher levels. And that includes movie reviews, travelogues, essays, short stories, albums of music, multiple audiobooks, including one that just went up. What was that one, Sarah?
The Ghost's Summons by Ada Brisson.
So if you want to enjoy that, head on over to patreon.com/screamscenepodcast.
Well, Ben, this was a biggie. Thank you everyone for listening so far. I'm sure next week will be a lighter load.
Maybe. Next week, we are going back to Mexico, and we are watching El Barón del Terror.
The Baron of Terror?
Yes, although it was released in America as The Brainiac, directed by Chano Urureta.
Okay, sweet. Well, we will see you then, creatures of the night.
Bye.
Bye.